We're at 8:47. One at 8:46.
Okay, good evening. It is now 8:47. We'll be starting. I can't help myself. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara, Daf Mem Ches, and a little bit of Daf Mem Tes and Aleph. I'll have to pause because we'll really be in the middle of a sugya. And we're talking about Asherah. Tonight's shiur is in memory of my brother, Avram Gershon ben Shmuel Mordechai. Tonight, tomorrow is his ninth yortzeit. Yiratzon his neshama should have an aliyah. The Mishnah says, Shalosh Asheros Hein, Ilan Shenitao Mitchila L'Shem Avodas Kochavim Harezu Asura. Let's say that a person is stark Balo Kochavim. He plants a tree for the sake of Avodah Zara. Harezu Asura. Rashi adds in the color that we know from previous blot. Rashi says at the top of the page, it can be undone by a goy. It's not permanent status, but until further notice, it's going to be usher, and that'll would be usher even behana. We'll see on the Amud Beis, you can't even sit in the shadow of that tree under certain circumstances. Says the Gemara, case 2 of our Mishnah, Gido upislo. Let's say that you are pruning, cutting a tree, and you're doing so l'shem avodas kochavim vehichlif, and you're doing so, and this, we'll talk about Behichlif in a second. Notel Masha Hechlif. Look at Rashi. Notel Masha Hechlif, Visarfo Kedin Ashera, Veikaro Mutter Be'ano. So let's say you do some pruning, L'Shem Avodah Zara. So let's say that the branch is 20 inches long, and I cut the branch down to 2 inches long. So anything beyond the 2 inches has a din of Avodah Zara. Not the ikar, not the primary part of the tree, just where he pruned from and all the new growth that happens there. So this is a unique chiddush, right? We're saying that it's one thing, it's a tree and a branch. I only cut branch number 1. There might be 25 branches. I cut branch number 1. I trimmed it down. L'shem avodah zara. Everything else growing on that one branch is avodah zara, not the rest. That's what Rashi says. Look at his language again. That piece, notel mashe hichlif, the extra part, the sarfo kedin asher, but ve'ikaro muter be'ano. Talk about a bifurcation. You look troubled.
I'm sure the Gemara will explain why. So
It doesn't.
okay, then why?
I mean, I guess it kind of does. Well, let's get into it. Let's say that under a tree you placed an idol, and then you took it away. So Harei Zumutar is teaching us, of course, that the placement of the idol doesn't change the status of the tree into something that is a chefetz shel iser. Amre debei Rabbi Yana. In regards to that second case where we said that pruning and everything beyond that cut point is going to be avodah zara, vihu. What are the parameters of that? Shehivrich v'hirkiv begufo shel ilan. That's only true if you're mavrich or markiv. Let's talk about these two things. Shehivrich, when you are, and this is the same letters, mavrich and markiv were just different words. Mavrich is when you take a branch, you bend it underground, and then bring it back out of the ground. That's called being mavrich, and then that new one may or may not have the status of a new tree. That's what we want to say. It's being mavrich. Markiv we're much more familiar with, which is grafting, where if you have a branch of, let's say, an orange tree, and you want to graft it to a new orange tree, what you do is you cut the branch on an angle, you bring in the branch of another tree that's about the same size, and you tape it together and allow it to grow that way. The fruits that grow off of that branch will be a blend of the two trees. That's how we do grafting. So says the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Yanai, when do we say that this case of notel mashe hichlif works? That's in a case of hivrich v'hirkiv b'gufo shel ilan. Says the Gemara, what a weird parameter. We already have a parameter. It's called pruning. Why are you giving me unique cases of hivrich and hirkiv? After all, v'ha'anan gida upislo tanan. We already know what the parameters are, and it's not what you said. So why are you just changing the Mishnah? So says the Gemara, you're right. Elaki itmar de Rav Yanai le'inyan bittel itmar. That's talking about le'inyan bittel in regards to undoing avodah zara. Te'afal gav de hivrich v'hirkiv begufo shel ilan. Even if your manipulation of the goy is to take the tree and to be mavrich, again, to take that branch, put it underground, bring it back up somewhere else, or to be markiv. Even if you did that, kinot al mashechliv, as long as you remove from where you started working by the harkava or by the havracha, shapir dami, we would say no problem at all, and no problem at all means that it's now mutter. So could you imagine a scenario where I was mavrich a tree, so now instead of growing pure oranges, I grow red blood oranges because I grafted. So the halacha is as long as I remove that branch from the point of the break, even though I've grown fruits from that branch, it doesn't matter. The tree itself now goes back to mutter status, mutter bana, no problem at all. Why did Rabbi Yanai add this? Because there's a chiddush in this case. Demahu de tema, we're about 10 lines down on Mem Ches V'Aleph. Demahu de tema, that kevan de hivrich v'hirkiv begufo shel ilan, since I did a significant manipulation of havracha or harkava with the tree, maybe I would argue that that's different than just a small change on a tree with a branch, but rather ki ilan shenitao mitchila dami v'litzar kula. If I do havracha or if I do harkava, maybe we'd say that that's significant enough of a change that the whole tree now becomes asur. And I could understand a svara for that. I hear that. Says the Gemara, Kamash Malan, that that's not true. That even these more extreme interventions with a tree of harkava and havracha, they can be brought back to square one where they're just removed and the rest of the tree is mutter. We haven't answered your question yet. Still fair.
Right.
That's all part one of the Gemara, is that this chiddush is that when we talk about manipulating a tree, we can do so piecemeal. Branch number one could be Avodah Zara d'oraisa. Branch number two is mutter b'ana. It's quite the spectrum on the same tree. Okay, good. Says the Gemara, a quarter of the way down, Amar Shmuel, Hamishtacha ilan. If somebody bows down to a tree, so from that moment on, any growth subsequent to that, tosefte asura. Anything after that point is going to be asur. It's very difficult to measure this because if I am correct, trees grow from the bottom. I think the whole tree gets pushed up when there's growth. I'm pretty sure that's how it works, if I remember from bio class back in the day. And that means, and I don't know if they had this knowledge of like where things grew, they may not have really noticed, but I believe that our growth in trees, it adds to the bottom and pushes up the whole tree. Lamai nafkamina. Difference would be which part of the tree is asur. If we say that from the time he bows, the tosefis is asur, maybe in today's modern science, what we know about trees is we would have said, don't worry about it, all the fruits are fine. It's only the bottom couple of inches. He davened to the tree to Avodah Zara on January 1st of 2010. Now it's 2025. The tree has grown 10 feet. So the bottom 10 feet are okay. So you can't take wood from there. Okay. The fruit doesn't grow there anyways, no problem. Again, similar idea, which is that we're taking only part of the tree and making it asur. But here the Gemara has a problem. You said that hishtachava, Shmuel, you said that hishtachava can create this status where that which grows afterwards is asur. That's not a pashat azach based on our Mishnah. Masi Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar says, I don't understand, Shmuel. Look at our Mishnah. That if you're pruning and then whatever, then that you can then remove whatever you want and then you can bring the tree back to normal. But how do we make it asur for that which it grows? Let's say I cut a branch and the branch grows an extra 2 inches afterwards and I had cut out the Shem Avodah Zara. So as long as I go back to the cut mark, we're good, no problem at all. But that's only Gido Pisloin, but Lo Gido Pislolo. Shmuel wanted to say that pruning a tree, Shmuel wanted to say that bowing to a tree would bring us to a point where anything that grows afterwards would be Avodah Zara. But our Mishnah doesn't say that. Hishtachava is not enough, but the pruning of the tree is a minimum. Doctor?
I have a question about shiur.
Yeah.
Is this a specific variety of tree?
Mm-mm.
Or it could just be any tree of any kind?
Yeah.
That they just choose to.
Think about it from a halachic perspective. If a non-Jew plants an oak or if a non-Jew plants a willow and his intent is to serve an idol, there would be no difference halachically between those two trees. It has to do with the utilization of the tree. So any sapling, any model, doesn't matter. They would all be the same as it. Now, it's probably the case that there was a far fewer set of selection of trees back in the day, I would imagine, just guessing, but with cross-pollination of boats coming from here and there, and we bring seeds across the globe. We know that some trees are indigenous to certain areas. Chicago doesn't have palm trees. So like it probably was that's always true. But it's probably the case that the trees were commonly the same, but it is not the case that halachically it would be different for a different tree. So the Gemara here is pushing on Shmuel. Shmuel says hishtachava is a service of a tree that's enough to make it so that future growth would be asur. And Rebbe Lazar, who was the next generation of Amoraim, says, I don't understand. Our Mishnah says that hishtachava is not enough. Our Mishnah says you got to do something physical. So Amar Lach Shmuel Hamani, whose shita is that? That is Rabbanan he. That's the shita of the Rabbanan that we saw a couple of days ago, if you'll recall. Nitao ulevesof avodah. That if somebody plants a tree and later serves it, so then it is mutter according to the Chachamim. So that means that our Mishnah is the Chachamim, because our Mishnah says that if you are mishtach, well, the way our Gemara explains our Mishnah, if you're mishtachabeh, according to Shmuel, if you're mishtachabeh to a tree, after it was planted, it doesn't make it Avodah Zara. So Shmuel is not that shita. Shmuel would hold like Rabbi Yossi, as we'll see in a moment. And it must be that our Mishnah, sorry, let me be more clear. Our Mishnah, Rabbi Lazar says, Shmuel, let me try the sentence for the third time. According to Shmuel, our Mishnah is the shita of the Rabbanon. And according to, that's our Mishnah. And the brisa that we just had, or the statement from Rabbi Lazar, that is going to be a little different. Shmuel will say, Da'amar Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Da'amar Ilan Shenatol B'sov Avdo Aser. So that would be the difference between them. That Shmuel holds that Ishtachava alone to a tree, asers it, and any growth after that point would be categorically aser. So he's carrying the machlokas tanoim that we've seen over the last many days between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda into our case of just bowing down to a tree over here to aser the extras. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple. Maskifla Rav Ashi, and it's possibly not Rav Ashi because the timing doesn't really make sense. If this is a conversation that's happening, Rabbi Lazar, who was our previous person, knew Shmuel. And if we're going to be talking in the same generation, Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Lazar lived at the same time. They were both in the 3rd century of the Amoraim. This goes back to a historical note of 2 different models of sugyas in Shas. One is referred to as an Amoraic sugya. An Amoraic sugya, you will find all of the Amoraim in sequential age order. That is what we have over here. The earliest is Shmuel. After that is Rabbi Lazar. After that is Rabbi Yosef. There are other types of sugyas in Shas that are called stama sugyas. Stama sugyas are not oriented around a chronological time of Amoraim, but rather it's topic based. So then when you see Amoraim there, they're often out of age order. You'll find older, younger. Reb Zara might be before Rav, and Rav might be after Rav Ashi. It's totally out of whack. So these are 2 different models of sugyas and Shas. So this one, the Rishonim don't say this here, but there is such a concept that we have an Amoraic sugya. So the Gemara is pushing that this should make sense. Rav Ashi is just not the right name, Pashat. So it switches it to Rabbi Yosef, who lived at the same time. And basically, Rabbi Yosef is asking, he's asking a question to Rabbi Lazar. He says, I don't understand. Mimai de Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanon b'tosefes pligi. How can you say, how do you know? He's really asking the question more on Shmuel. How do you know that the machlokas about what we see in our Gemara, about tosefes, about growing after hishtachava, how do you know that's a machlokas that they would agree to? Perhaps that's not what we're talking about. Dilma, tosefes l'divrei hakol aser. Maybe everyone would agree. The Rabbanon and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda would agree that anything that grows after servicing a tree would be completely aser. And really, perhaps, uve ikaro pligi, they're arguing about the trunk of the tree itself. How so? The Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Savar, ikaro nami aser. Rabbi Yossi would say, in addition to the fact that we hold that Natao ulvasof avdo would be aser, that's true not only for the Tosefes, but even for the Iker. You got to burn the whole tree. The Rabbanan would hold that the branch is a problem, but the Iker is totally fine. That you need to cut off certain things. So according to the Shita of the Rabbanan, perhaps this is the split. It's about the Iker of the tree, and it's not about the Tosefes. So maybe Shmuel is completely wrong in his assessment that we have 2 different Shitas, Hishtachava that he holds would. Maybe this is just not what they're arguing about. And v'chi tema, and if you want to say halo mitartzinan, it shouldn't say ha dilo. It should say v'chi tema ha mitartzinan hachi, ha halo mitartzinan hachi. If you want to say Okay, but we didn't see this answer before. When we learned this sugya earlier, nobody said boo about Tosefes. This is the first time we're hearing about it. So how can you apply that over here? So says the Gemara, one of the things I could do to make to make everything work over there. So really the next line is easy to read in words, but hard to really get a good grasp on. What we would need to do to learn this properly is look at this sugya side by side with the sugya that we learned a few blot ago. We're not going to do that now because it's very time consuming and very nuanced. So I'm going to leave a little bit of this vague. But over there, the Mari Makomos that we had were not the Mari Makomos that the Tanoim said. We attributed Mari Makomos to them. And if we wanted it to be that Tosefes might apply to the Machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, then says the Gemara, and we're on the last of the short lines, then Epuch Rabbanan lid Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, that maybe what we should do is flip which sources apply to which person. Ud Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbanan, whatever the source the Rabbanan use, they won't use it anymore, and vice versa. Im Kain, says the Gemara, if we do that, then Gida Opislo, Man Ktanila. If we switch the sources, then there is no source that fits with our Mishnah, not the Rabbanan, lo Rabbanan, velo Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. If we say that the source that the Rabbanan used is now the source of Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and vice versa, then our Mishnah makes no sense. And the Gemara is going to articulate why that's true. Rabbanan, according to the rabbis, belogi duo upislo nami tosefes asura. According to the rabbis, they hold it's going to be asur no matter what. If you even without giduo pislo, they're gonna no matter what they would hold that it's going to be asur. And Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda ikar ila nami asur, that they would hold that even the tree is going to be asur. Forget about the tosefes, which means that we don't have, according to this version, a proper understanding of our Mishnah. So says the Gemara, I'm not worried. I can explain our Mishnah to you, Ibais Ema Rabbanan and Ibais Ema Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. One way or the other, I can figure it out. That's what the Gemara says. Ibais Ema Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. If I want to try and understand our Mishnah like Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Kika Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda. When does Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda hold below Gido Pislo Iker Ilan Aser? When does he hold that even without pruning, the ikar of the tree is going to be aser? That's only bistama. That's only when a person worships a tree without specifying what part of the tree they're worshiping, which is something I never would have thought of. Like if I'm not a big Baal of Avodah Zara, but had I been, I would have said, oh, there's a tree over there. I'm going to go worship the tree. So the Gemara says that that wasn't necessarily what they would do. They would say, I'm going to worship the trunk of the tree. I'm going to worship the branches of the tree. I'm going to worship the fruits of the tree. So that's what the Gemara says. According to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, when would he say that the ikar of the Ilan is aser? That's bistama. Abal gido pislo, but perhaps we could be medayik from there that if there was pruning, gali adaite, then only because he pruned do we now know de betosefes nichale beikar Ilan no nichale. Maybe Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda could wrap his head around the idea that Tosefes could be Asur and the Iker could be Mutter. Why? Because it depends on the kavana of the Baal of Avodah Zara. If he's bistama, he just sees a tree, he goes Givaldik, I'm going to worship the tree. Okay, then the Iker is also Asur. But according to Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, if you're pruning, what does that show you? The pruning tells you, pruning the Shem of Avodah Zara, I only care about the Tosefes. I don't have a problem with the Iker. So then Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda could be a Mekel, and that would be how we would understand our Mishnah according to him. And Ibai Sema Rabbanan, just to close out this first Mishnah and Gemara of the day, we'll have a second one and a third one. Ibai Sema Rabbanan, how would the rabbis have understood our Mishnah? So says the Gemara, Gido Pislo Itzrichale. We needed to talk about the case of pruning. Salkadaita Chamina, Kevan de Avad Le Maisa Begufe, that since we did an action, we did something hands-on, we manipulated the tree. Iker Ilan Nami Litzar. Therefore, the whole tree should be Aser. Kamashman. So everybody has a svara to figure out how we can learn our Mishnah. And this little piece of Gemara is quite difficult. And it really does require more time. And again, that comparative analysis. So if you have some time over Shabbos, it's a beautiful Gemara to look at in comparison. And Ayin Sham and the Rishonim as well.
Would this not also apply to other inanimate objects?
What?
Serving stone, a mountain. If you're serving only the peak of the mountain, right? Can you chop off a piece
I
of
don't know.
metal?
I don't know if it's like
Is it
a mamish.
trees?
I don't think it's only trees, but I think it's something that has an activity to it, such as pruning. So like, I don't know what the equivalent would be, but let's say yarn. Let's say a person is making a blanket and they say, I'll give you a great example. You know those blankets that have the things at the end, the ones, the annoying little,
The
the tassels,
yeah.
right? So let's say the Baal Avodah Zara goes over to the blanket and says, "This is my deity." Okay, that's stama. But what if he says, "I'm doing the following act for Avodah Zara," and he cuts off a tassel?
Hmm.
So that would be an application of the same thing where, again, they don't grow, so therefore the whole rest of the blanket is mutter
Right.
because there's no growth.
Well,
But rocks, I don't know. I'm just projecting. That's real. It's just not perfectly comparable to a tree.
right, but you would think that up until now, every object that we've been saying, we were assuming that you're serving the entire object. You bow to the mountain,
Correct.
right? Not
Correct.
the peak of the mountain or the sides of the mountain. I don't know
Correct.
how mountains.
Right.
Right. But
Right.
you know what I
Whatever
mean?
distinctions we could make. I just my amaratzis. I didn't know that you could split a tree that way. I had no idea.
But now that you read it, it's like, okay, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I guess I hear it.
Or is it exclusive to trees? And for everything else, that's my question. You're saying it's not exclusive
I
to
don't
trees.
think I wouldn't think it's exclusive to trees. I would think it's any type of avodah zara where you can bifurcate, where you can say like this but not that. I don't think you could do that with a mountain, but you can do it with clothing.
With the statue, you could do it with the actual thing, but not the base of the statue.
Right,
But
that's
we
true.
didn't mention that
Right,
before.
correct. By mountains, the distinction that we made is that the har itself can't become avodah zara, but
Right.
that which is on top of it, the gold that would cover it, is a machlokas tanaim. So you can already see a piece, kind of like a shemetz of that idea, but it's not the same item. It's not. The
Right.
gold is separate. It's a
A
separate.
statue would be a better example.
Statue is a good example.
You're serving the arm, but you're not serving the rest of it. Then
Right.
you'd be good. You
Yeah,
could use it to build a house.
yeah, exactly. So that I watched someone. I told the story. The guy who cut off all the noses on the foosball machine.
Yeah.
So let's say Baal Avodah Zara did that. Now that's the opposite. He's cutting his pestle. But let's say that he
You can't
said,
serve the noses.
yeah, you just, so then we would say the rest of the foosball machine is mutter because the Baal Avodah Zara was only doing the avodah of the nose, whatever it was. I'm projecting, but I would have said that there's two categories. There's things that have different parts and things that don't. There are things that have different parts. We could make this distinction. Okay, the next Mishnah is 10, 12 lines from the bottom of Mem Ches Amud Aleph. Ezo hi Ashera. An interesting order of Mishnayos. How can you ask Ezo hi Ashera? Pasha just been discussing. That's going to be the opening question of the Gemara today. But so we have a machlokes tanaim here. What is an Ashera tree? So first answer is Tanakama Kol sheyesh tachteha avodas kochavim, which was rejected by our previous Mishnah. But that if you have an idol standing under a tree, so then that tree is now an Ashera. It's not an act that's done to a tree. It's an act that's in proximity to a tree. And we would say that that's an Ashera. The Mishnah on the top of the page said, I believe you, but if you take it away, the tree is no longer an Ashera. But while it's there, that was the last line of the previous Mishnah of Hemi tachte avodas kochavim v'not la harezu muteres. So the Tanakama seems to hold that afal pi, that the action that you're doing is not direct and that it's removable. So then it still makes you're not even worshiping the tree b'chlal. It's just underneath the branches. Reb Shimon Omer, kol she'ovdin osa. You have to worship the tree. Now the Gemara tells a story. Umaysa b'tzidan, the Mishnah I should say. Umaysa b'tzidan, there was a story in the locale of Tzidan. Be'ilan shayu ovdin osa. There was a tree that people were worshiping as avodah zara. Umatzu tachtav gal, and they found a little mound underneath it, a mound of rocks, whatever it was. Amar lahen Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon said, bidku es hagal hazeh. Go check, I bet you there's something under the rocks. Ubidkuhu matzu batsura. And they found an item there. Amar lahen, he said, Hol ve'ulatsura hein ovdin. Since the bowing that they were doing at that tree was not to the tree, but instead to the little pesel that we found buried in the rocks, therefore natir lahen sa'ilan. So what is he saying? If they're bowing to the tree mamish, the tree's aser. But if we find a little pesel, then the tree is mutter. The action toward the tree is identical. It's still bowing or whatever service they do. But the kavana of the guy mattered. If they're bowing to the tree is aser. If they're bowing to a pesel in front of the tree, Even if your action of bowing is identical, nothing changes. You're bowing at 91 degrees, whatever, it's all exactly the same. Nothing changes. Shimon says, but they weren't serving the tree, which is a very interesting distinction. I hear it. It's an interesting distinction. Otherwise, you'd have to say that everything in front of you forever ongoing, adhecha, then where does it stop? It's like tuma ola ad la rakia,
Like it's obvious.
To the Gemara, it's Dvarim Pshutim, and it is. Yeah, I hear the idea. I'm the lumdus part of my brain is saying, but you did the same exact Misa in the same exact direction, and they're right near each other. I'm not saying I'm right. I just I would have asked that question, and I would have been found that I'm wrong.
According to this definition of the shiur tree, which others reject as well.
Correct, which the Tanakhama doesn't like, anyways. He would have said that the tree was usher with the pestle underneath. That's their difference. That's what he holds.
Danny K probably has a riddle for that.
What?
Who?
The pestle.
The pestle?
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
It's like mortar.
Should I let it go?
Oh.
Oh my God. And I'm canceling Daf Yomi. I'm going home now. Okay. So that is our Mishnah. Ezra Yashera, says the Gemara. What kind of question is that? V'ha'anan shalosh asheros tanan. Look at the top of the page. We just said shalosh asheros. We spoke about the 3 different kinds of trees. So what are you talking about? Says the Gemara. Hachi kamar. What we're just basically highlighting over here when we talk about the Ashera is that there are multiple trees, Shtayim, the Divrei HaKol, that everyone agrees to. V'achas machlokes Reb Shimon, v'Rabbanon. All we're saying over here is Ezo Ashera, which is a machlokes. And the answer is this one case. That's the only thing that's in this Mishnah. The previous Mishnah speaks about Shalosh Asheros. But there's more things happening over here that's a machlokes that don't apply in the previous one. Ezo hi Ashera shenechleku bar Reb Shimon v'Chachavim. What's the case where the Chachamim and Reb Shimon actually argue? Says the Gemara, Kol sheyesh tachteha avodas kochavim. Reb Shimon omer kol she'ovden osad, like we saw in our Mishnah. Ezo hi ashera stam. The syntax here is a little difficult to understand. Let's read the words as they are. What is considered to be a stam ashera? And Rashi explains at the bottom of the page, 3 lines from the bottom going on to 2 lines from the bottom. Ezo hi ashera stam. It's not a continuation of the previous thing. Talmuda, the Gemara, de pligi ba'amoroi, ezo hi ashera stam ilan shelo huvrar lanu, shehi ashera. Be'eze simin nikar im hi ashera im lav. What would I be looking for when I walk by a tree to know that it's an ashera tree? That is the Gemara's question. It's just written in an odd way. Amar Rav says, well, here's one obvious one. Kol she komrim yoshev tachteha ve'ein to'amen be'peiroseha. Anyone where the priests of that religion are sitting under the tree, but refuse to eat the fruits. That's your litmus test. If you see a bunch of, people of the cloth, and they're all of a sudden just sitting there, but they won't eat any of the fruit, that's like red flag. That means you should assume it's an Asherah tree. Ushmuel Amar, that it's not so simple. He pushes back on Rav. Afilu Amre, even if the Komrim say, even if the priests say, Hani Tamre the Beinitzur Fi Aser, even if they were to say that these dates from this tree are going to Beinitzur Fi, which is, as Rashi points out, the last Rashi on the page, Shem Avodas Kochavim Shalahem, then it's also going to be Aser because the Rami Bashechra, they use the dates for making beer, and they drink that beer on the day of their holidays. So therefore, even if it's not just them sitting there and not eating, but even if they earmark the dates for making beer, that alone would make it usher as well. Amar Ameimar Amruli Save de Pumpedisa Hilchasa Kashmuel. We hold like Shmuel in this particular case that not only if they sit there and don't eat the fruit, but even if they earmark the fruit, that fruit is going to Avodah Zara, and the tree would be usher. That brings us to our third Mishnah of the day. And that is as follows. Lo yeshev betzila. Person should not sit in the shade of an Asherah tree. But v'im yoshav tahor. But if you did so, b'di'eved, then you're still tahor. So that's in the shade. I want to just be clear. That's in the shade. That's not under the tree, but that's in a shade where the shadow is cast off to the side of the tree. So let's say that my tree is here, and there's leaves here. And if I stand right under it, pashut am tameh. The first end of the Mishnah is if I stand over here and the sun is casting a shadow on me, as long as I'm not under mamish, I'm outside of the actual ohel of the tree. So that's what the Mishnah says over here, below that im yashav tahor. Below yavor tachteh, you should not walk under the tree, v'im avar tameh, because we spoke about the fact that there's a tuma to Avodah Zara. Okay, that's the first two dinim. One is we can't sit in the shade, and the other is we can't go under it. But the first din is only asr lechatchila. The second din is asr even b'diavad. So says the Gemara, Haisa gozelas es harabim, that if the tree is stealing from the public, Rashi, Haisa gozelas es harabim, 8-9 lines down, Shahaya nofa nota the rishus harabim, the branches are hanging over in the rishus harabim, so that's different. Then ve'avar tachteha, if you then go under the tree, tahor. So the Asherah tree is in my backyard, but it hangs over my back alley. You walk in my back alley, it's an Asherah tree. That's not a you problem. That's a me problem. Good. So says the Gemara, Lo yeshe betzila, you should not sit in the shade. Says the Gemara pshita. That should be obvious. The Gemara responds, Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rav Yochanan, Lo nitzrach ela letzel tzila. We're not talking about the regular shade of the cast shadow, but instead what we're talking about is the shade beyond that. Let me explain. Let's say that this is my tree, and let's say that this is a 20-foot tree. So what we do is we draw a line of 20 feet. To be in this space, even if you are not under the leaves of the tree, that is asr. That's for sure asr. Now the nof is only here. The tree is 20 feet. The 20 feet outside of the ohel is also tameh. But let's say that this 20 feet, let's say it's like early in the evening and the sun is very low and it casts a super long shadow. So now we have two parts of the shadow. We have the first 20 feet, which is the height of the tree on the y-axis, now on the x-axis. And then we have everything beyond that. That's the distinction that we're talking about. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Lo nitzrach ela letzel tzila, that we're talking about the first din of the Mishnah when it says Lo yeshe betzila, that lechatchila it's aser, b'diavad it's mutter. That's not talking about the first 20 feet outside of the ohel of the tree. That's talking about 21 feet out to the end of the shadow. That's aser lechatchila. Michlal, that implies to betzel komasa, that within 20 feet of the ohel of the tree, that im yashav tameh, that implies that you're going to be tameh, not if, pasha, you'll be tameh if you go under the tree, but even the 20 feet around the tree should also be asr. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not the correct diuk to make. Ta'afilu letzel komasa nami im yashav tahor. Even if you sat in the initial 20 feet, which again is the height of the tree, and the 20 feet of shadow that surrounds the tree should have been asr, but that's the same din as actually tzel tzila, even outside the 20 feet. V'kamash malon te'afilu letzel tzila ve'yashav. The chiddush is that in tzel tzila you also have an isra of sitting there. So here's how it would work. Under the nof of the tree itself, no question you're tameh. In the first 20 feet outside of the nof, if the tree is 20 feet tall, we look at that distance, 20 feet out, and there, that's an isser lechatchila. You're not supposed to sit there. We extend the isser lechatchila outside of the 20 feet up until the end of the shadow. So basically, the entire shadow, I don't care how long it is. If it's an Asherah tree, it is usher for you to sit in that shadow. It could be 1,000 feet. For as long as there's a shadow, there's an isser lechatchila to sit there. And all of that is version 1 of our Gemara. Then says the Gemara, Ika damasni la asefa. Some say that this comment of Rabbi Bar Chana was not talking about the din of lo yeshev betzila, but rather v'im yashav tahor. That if in fact you do sit there, that it's not talking about the isser lechatchila, it's talking about the heter b'diavad. Okay, so how does this play out? So our Mishnah said v'im yashav tahor. Says the Gemara pshita that if you sat there din b'diavad, of course it's going to be mutter. You're like 80 feet from the tree. It just happens to be sunset, so the shadow's super long. Pasha did say it's not an isser lechatchila. So Amar Rabbi Bar Chana and this Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo nitzrocha ela letzel komasa. Rabbi Bar Chana has a different comment. What were we talking about? We were only talking about the tzeil komasa, which is whatever height of the tree is. If it's a 20-foot high tree, so then the 20-foot ring outside of the ohel is also going to be potentially included. Michlal, that implies de letzel tzila afilu lechatchila yashav. That implies that if the komasa, if the 20 feet around is kosher lechatchila and tamei b'diavad, then once you're outside of that space in the tzeil tila, that it's mutter even lechatchila. There'll be a big nafkamina between these two versions of Rabbi Bar Chana. According to the first version, I don't care how long the shadow is, it's always going to be Asherah, it's always going to be an Isser Lechatchila Mutter B'di'evet. But in the second version of our Gemara of Rabbi Bar Chana, where it is Mutter B'di'evet, where it is Aser Lechatchila and Mutter B'di'evet to be in the Komas in the 20 feet, but that implies that it's Lechatchila Mamish outside of the 20 feet, which is a Chiddush. So says the Gemara Lo, that's not the right way to learn this. The opposite. It's a bigger chiddush to say that im yashav tahor, that b'di'evet you're tahor even though you're in tzeil komasa. Okay, two different ways to learn the Gemara, with the nafkamina being sitting in the tzeil tzila. According to version 1, that would still be aser lechatchila, and according to version 2, it would potentially be mutter lechatchila. Then we said the din of lo ya'avor tachteha. We said the din that one should not go under a tree that's an Asherah, v'im avar tameh, and if one did so, they'd be tameh. Says the Gemara, my taima. Efshar deleka tikroves avodas kochavim. If you have a tree that's an Asherah, there's no way that there isn't something that's begeder tikroves avodas Zara, the tree itself, an idol, something. If we know a tree is an Asherah tree and you walk under it, you've exposed yourself to tikroves avodas Zara, and that is going to be mitameyu. How do we know this? Money. Who is this author? Must be Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseirahi. The Tanya, we have a brisa. This is a brisa that we saw about 10, 12 blot ago. Ooh, a little bit more. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Minayin letikroves avodas kochavim shemetama ba'oel. How do we know that when someone's involved in tikroves avodah zara, which is it's adjacent type of avodas kochavim, how do we know that it's metama ba'oel? Shene'emar, the pasuk says in Sefer Tehillim, vayitzamedu leva'al peor vayochlu zivchei mesim, that we see the pasuk talking about Baal peor and zivchei mesim. Look at this. Ma meis metame ba'ohel, af tikroves avodas kochavim metama ba'ohel. And here we don't have any machlokas. The last din of the Mishnah, I should say not the last din, if you say, if you walk under an Asherah tree, so Pasha, you're going to be absolutely Tameh Mamish. So let's talk about one other case. Let's say just Stam Tumas Ohel. Forget about the tree being Avodah Zara. What if the tree is not Avodah Zara, but under one side of the tree is Avodah Zara and you're under Tumas Ohel, like a mace? So forget the tree. L'chora, it's the same din that you would be Metame Ba'oel, because there's a din of Tumas Ohel by Avodah Zara. Then we spoke about the case of Hayasa Gozelas es Harabim v'avar tachteh hator. We said that if the branches are hanging over into the public domain and one walked under that branch, even though that tree is an Asherah tree mamish, it doesn't matter, tahor, because the Chachamim are instituting this. This isn't a din d'oraisa. The pasuk that we just quoted from was from Tehillim. Divrei Torah mi divrei Kabbalah lo yalfinan. We can't learn a din d'oraisa from a pasuk in Tehillim. So therefore, when we say that walking under a tree is going to be metameyu, l'chora it's a din d'Rabbanan. And therefore, when the branches of the Asherah tree hang over into the public domain and you walk under it, the Chachamim weren't gozer in that case that you should become tamim. Says the Gemara, Iboya lehu. I love this type of question. Are we saying avar, past tense, which is a lashon of lechatchila b'di'eved? If you did, meaning don't do it, right? Avar, if you did, lechatchila, you should not, but if you did lechatchila, you'd be okay. B'di'eved, you'd be okay. O over, or are we saying, no, you may go under the tree branches that are hanging off of Karesh's backyard? Is that allowed? So this is a machlokas if we say the din of walking under branches that are hanging over the public domain, is that mutter lechatchila, or is that only mutter b'di'eved? Says the Gemara halfway down on Mem Chesem Beis. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Elazar Mishmei Dechizkiya Amar Over, which is a language of completely mutter, no problem at all. You're allowed to walk under those branches. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Im Avar, only if you did. And says the Gemara Chiddush v'lo pligi. There's actually no argument between them. Ha deika dircha acharina. One is when you have another option. If you have another option, but you took the shortcut, you're a fool. Why would you do that? You're exposing yourself potentially to tumah. So then we would say it's aser lechatchila to do that. But hadeleka dirka acharina. So let's talk about an alley. In my alley, there's only one way to get to the other side of my house in the alley, which is to walk through the alley. If my Asherah branches are hanging over the entire alley, so then it's mutar lechatchila. There the chachamim weren't masakin at all. And the Gemara tells a story about Rav Sheshes, and you may recall from previous episodes in Shas that Rav Sheshes was blind. So says the Gemara, Amar le Rav Sheshes l'shame. Rav Sheshes said to his servant, Kimatis lahasam, when we get to that place, and what was he talking about? The trees of an Asherah tree that were hanging over the Rishus HaRabim. He said, when I get there, arihitni, walk me through quickly. But this makes no sense. Heichi dami. What do you mean, walk me through quickly? If there is no other way to get through the alley, the street, without walking under the branches of the Asherah that are hanging over the Rishus HaRabim, so lama li'arihini, why are you walking fast? It's mutar lechatchila. We just said it's mutar lechatchila. Meshra shari. And if there is another path, so why in the world would you walk under an Asherah tree? Ki amar arihini mishari. It's still asur lechatchila. So what was Rav Sheshes asking his shamish to do for him? So says the Gemara, La'olam deleka dircha achrina. Really, what we're saying is that there was no other path. Really, it was mutar lechatchila for him to do this. However, the adam chashuv shiny, because he was an adam chashuv, so therefore he wanted to be makbid. In other words, it's mutar legamre, but as a rav, pasnisht, I shouldn't be walking under a tree that's an asher. Okay, yeah, the guy had it hanging over, he should have cut it. It's mutar lechatchila, but it's just not the way we do it. That's what Rabbi first said to me about doing brisim on goyim. He said it's mutar, but I can't do it. He said it's not for me. He said I'm a dayan. It's like I'm not going to a goy sheget's house. I'm like, I'm not a dayan. Baruch Hashem. We'll stop right here and we'll pick up Amir Hashem tomorrow night with as much Talmud as I possibly can learn in the next day. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
Yeah.